Welcome back, everyone. The topic of this lesson will be how to graph lines, and we're going to put lines on the Cartesian coordinate system, which we discussed in the last lesson. So let's get started. Graphing lines. You can create a line by connecting any 2 points on this grid that you see on the left. So let's try to graph a line that contains the point, or runs through the point, -2, 1, and the point 4, 2. So quick review of graphing and plotting points at the same time. -2, 1 says from the origin you go back -2 spaces and you go up +1, and that shall give you the location of your first point. Back 2, up 1. The second point says from the origin, that's the center here, you go over 4, +4, and up 2. That gives you your second point. And once you have 2 points, all you've got to do is connect the 2 with a straight line. If you're graphing by hand, you'll use a straight edge. The edge of your book, a ruler, side of a driver's license, whatever you happen to have. And that's all it takes. Now notice our line has arrows on both ends. That means it goes on forever in both directions. Forever. Kind of like we talked set notation back in inequalities. Infinity. Does not stop. This is just a small portion of the line. Okay? Now, linear equations are just what they sound like. It's an equation that generates a line when you graph, hence the word linear. Linear equations contain 2 variables, and it's important to know what they mean. So let's take a look at them right now. Variables x and y, the 2 standard variables you'll see. The x variable is what we call the independent variable, loosely referred to as the input. This is what you plug in. It's also known as the domain. That's an important word. You'll see that a lot. The domain, the x-axis. The y variable is known as the dependent variable. It's referred to as the output. So if you plug in x, the input, you get out y. That's your output. It depends. The y value depends on what you plug in for x. It's also known as the range. What's the height of the graph? These 2 variables together form the points that we plot, the coordinates, x, y, input and output, domain and range. All right, linear equations. Equations that generate points we need to create a line. They'll create an infinite number of points. You can plug in any number you want just about for your x variable, depending on the equation. We organize the information into what we call a t-chart. You get a t by separating your x and y variables, and a t by separating x and y from the numbers below them. On the left go our x variable and all the numbers associated with it. Remember, those are called independent variable, the input numbers, and the domain values. So these are all going to be actual numbers on the left, the numbers that you're choosing to plug in, or the numbers that you're told to plug in, either way. And the values that you get out of the equation, just by simply evaluating, go on the right. Remember, those numbers are considered dependent. This number depends on what you plug in. They're the output, it's what you get out of the equation, or they're also known as the range. So let's take a look at how to fill in a t-chart. So we want to complete the provided t-chart by evaluating, or just plug the numbers in and see what you get, the equation with the given values of x. So here's an equation. This is nothing new to us. We've seen stuff like this before. Y equals 2 times the x value plus 3. There's a t-chart. They gave us a set of input values, 0, 1, and 2. So all we want to do is plug 0 into the equation and see what we get out of it. So let's give that a shot now. Our y value is equal to 2 times the input of 0 in this case, plus 3. 2 times 0 is 0. We're left with y equals a value of 3. So that's the number we plug into our y value there. We get our first point that's located at 0, 3, and that's the point that we've already put into the graph. Now, let's take a look at the next one. Now we'll plug in the value of 1. So this is going to be y equals 2 times the input of 1 plus 3. Little multiplication here, you get 2 times 1 is 2, plus 3 gives you y value of 5. So, our output, or our dependent variable, is 5. That would be another point ready to plot, 1 comma 5. For the next value, let's plug in 2. So that's going to look like y equals 2 times the input value of 2 plus 3. Little evaluation now, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 3 is 7. So that's your y value, your output of 7, and that would be your last point that we look to plot, the point 2 comma 7. So that was just a look at how to evaluate and fill in a t-chart. The skills are all reviewed. You plug in the x value and you evaluate it. You see what you get when you actually run through the mathematics. Now let's take a look at filling a t-chart for the purpose of plotting a point. So this is where we're at. We want to fill the t-chart in. We want to plot the points and then connect the dots to form a line. So the equation that we're given is y equals negative x plus 1. And we have 5 points. I like to use these standard points to plug in, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, because it looks at what happens on the negative side, the left side of the graph. Takes a look at what happens at y value of 0. That's going to put you somewhere on this vertical axis line. It takes a look at what happens on the right side. So all we need to do is plug in our points to evaluate. Let's start by plugging in the x value of negative 2. So when x is negative 2, notice I leave parentheses here because that first negative is part of the equation. It says the opposite of negative 2, which is positive 2, plus 1. That gives you y value of 3. So we fill it into our t-chart. You get y value of 3. That gives us the point negative 2 comma 3. And we can now plot that point on the graph. So you go back 2 and up 3. And then we would fill in the next point in the same way. We plug in negative 1. Opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. Plus 1 is 2. That gives you the point negative 1 comma 2. And that says go back 1, up 2. Gives you your next point. Continue in the same manner. Plug in 0. Opposite of 0 is 0. Plus 1 is 1. Fill that in. These give you the point right here in the t-chart, 0 comma 1. Now plot it. It says from the origin go over 0 and go up 1. There you have it. Alright, now plug in 1. Opposite of positive 1 is negative 1. Plus 1 is 0. So this says you have a point at 1 comma 0. From the origin you go over 1 and up 0. Gives you your point. Notice our points are starting to follow on the same line. That's what we want. And the last one, let's plug in 2. The opposite of 2 is negative 2. Plus 1 is negative 1. So your quadrant, your point is at 2, negative 1. So let's go over 2, down 1, and there's your last point. The last thing to do is use your straight edge and connect the dots. We see that all points follow on the same line. It tells us we didn't make any mistakes. If we messed up on one of these somewhere, you would have a point floating somewhere off of the line. I just tell you to go back and double check that one point. But other than that, you can see everything fits. So all we're adding today is the idea of the t-chart really. You take your input values, also known as your domain values, you plug it into the equation, little evaluation, do the math, see what you get, and that'll give you your y value. As a result, you get a point, plot it, connect the dots, you're good to go.